So, BJ asked me to work on a couple of these while she's dealing with some medical issues. So, let's see what we can do. Okay, so this is the block that we'll be working on. And I have down here the various wool threads that we'll need. Some of them I haven't used yet, but I think we'll use them later. This brown is EN27, which matches up with what they list as bark in the instructions. EN50, listed as parchment for the lower body. EN46, which is mango for the upper body. EN30 is black, which is for the eye. On the pattern, they call for EN03, which is fog, but EN02 is a better match. 03 is more of a cooler gray, and I don't think it's part of the kit, so use 02. And then 13 for the leaf, which they call electric lime. Now let's look at ordering. I'll do the tail first, then the bottom of the body, then the top of the body, and then everything else can go in whatever order makes sense. I'll probably do the side, log, leaf, and then the eye. Here's the design of what it looks like when it's finished, so let me get these placed. For placing the applique pieces, I don't have a square that's exactly the right size, so I'm going to use this one. The first thing I'm going to do is find the approximate center of the block. The block is almost 8.5 inches, so we'll call the center at 4.25 inches, right about here. And somewhere around here in the pattern is where all these meet in the center, somewhere in this area. So the next thing I want to do is actually try to get rid of this fold in the background fabric here. I need to heat the iron up a bit more, so I'm going to move all of this stuff to the side. The fabric isn't completely square, but it's square enough. Right here is the center point, so let's get the bottom of the bird's body placed. And now the top of the bird's body, right about in here. And I've got it approximately like that. So that's close enough for measurements at the moment. Let me see if I can get this placed reasonably accurate. And then I think the right side will go up and over it like this and cover up a certain amount. If there's a little bit of a gap, this will help cover it. This is the tail. It's going to actually have to go down first. And then this actually goes across his tail, so we'll have feet coming down like that. Yeah, he has feet coming down like that. And then there's some stems coming up here to the leaf and then coming up here. I think it calls for a satin stitch section here, like a herringbone stitch. I'll figure that out once I get everything appliqued down. Now let's start gluing things down. I'm going to use the same glue stick that I had from the block before and hopefully not get extra glue on stuff. You see me gluing that branch down, but I realized later that it would have been easier to do that after the decorative stitching on the tail. You may want to hold off gluing down the branch until you've done that. So that's their placement. Here's my placement. I think it's time to start stitching. In the bobbin, I have an 80 weight deco bob that matches the background, and on the top I have EN02 wool thread. I think they call it latte, and it matches the tail and right side of the robin. Most of these applique stitches are going down the same for all the blocks, so like before, I'm setting the presser foot pressure to 35. I'm using a 20D foot with the needle all the way to the right, and my Bernina set to a blanket stitch. The stitch width is 3.0 and the length is also 3.0. Unlike BJ, I tend to run with the foot pedal. I feel like I have more control that way. BJ feels the buttons give you more control, so I guess it's a matter of what you prefer. I've got the first part sewn down, and I just wanted to show you that I'm going to be burying my threads for most of this project. I'm not going to show this everywhere, and you don't have to, but I like the way it looks better. Now it's onto the body of the bird, same as before with the parchment colored wool thread. Now it's onto the body of the bird, same as before with the parchment colored wool thread. This awl that I'm using to help position the fabric is from Clover. I like it because it doesn't have a sharp point at the end. It's almost like a tiny bulb at the point. It's still a very fine point, but there's a little less danger of poking through the fabric. Next up is the robin's head and the top of his body with the mango thread. Now we're back to EN02, the latte thread for the right side of the robin. We couldn't do both sections that use this at the same time because the mango colored part of the bird's body gets layered between them. The main trick here is that you want to make sharp points with the needle down. Next, we just need to stitch down the leaf with the lime green thread. Like the right side of the bird, you want to make the sharp point turns with the needle down. I stitched down the log or branch that the bird is standing on next, but I actually recommend you wait and do this after you've done the decorative stitching around the edge of the tail. Finally, I need to stitch down the bird's eye. The constant turns make this one a little tricky. BJ has some good instructions for this in block 2, where the eye is a round piece of wool that's the same size. Basically, you can use the back edge of the foot to help you center the eye after each stitch. So that's all the base stitching. Now I need to go through and figure out what I'm doing for the decorative parts. Let's look at the pattern. They start with a Pekingese stitch to do the background all the way around. Then they do the beak with what they call a closed fly, which is this one that resembles more like a bunch of V's. I'm probably going to use the same thing I did on the hummingbird, though. They do bullion knots around the lower portion of the face right here. I have some thoughts on that. I need to grab some of my stitch library, etc. to look at those. Then add 3 rows of chain stitches that taper off here. I think stitch 38 is the one that we normally use for chain stitching. And then the closed fly stitches along the body with the French knots in the same color between the zigzag patterns. That's what these are. I don't know if I'm going to do the French knots. I'm not a fan of the way the French knot looks when done by machine. I haven't found a way that doesn't have the thread clumping up on me. So I got to figure out what I'm going to do here. I'm wondering if this is best with a wide zigzag that almost comes out square. And then there's an open fly stitch around the side. That's this part right here. There are some stitches in the quilting section on my machine that might work for that too. And then switch to this color for the open fly stitches down the tail. These will be the same stitches but in a different color. Yeah, this is the white, and then this is kind of a variegated orange, the same color as this. These 2 lazy daisies here are for decorative purposes, so I might use the one that I designed or some other flower design here. I'm not sure yet. And then I need to finish off the bird, create 2 legs. They suggest an open fly stitch. And then they use a stem stitch around the outside of the branch. They embellish it with a couple of individual lazy daisies, but not the whole flower. Then the stem stitch over here and the leaves. This one on the left is a fishbone. They call the veins of the right leaf an open fly stitch. I decided to start with the beak. What I had to do here was figure out exactly where I wanted it. So if you see here, the eye is here, and the beak is kind of right about here, straight out from the eye, almost at a slight angle up. I marked it in pencil. I'm going to try and do it like that, but there's a very slight probability that it is too much of an angle up, and it needs to go this way. I'm using stitch number 406 on a single repeat, resized to 75%. The foot pressure is at 35, and the top tension is 2.0. I think I want it right about here. It may end up a little low, but right about here. I want to make sure I get the beak close enough to the bird's body, but not over the bird's body, so I can get the Pekingese stitch between them. There's a little gap. I don't know what I think of that. I want to leave just enough to be hidden by the Pekingese stitch. Okay, so this is hopefully going to look like a Pekingese stitch around the outside of the bird. I'm using soft lock number 20, which is kind of a tan color, to couch down 3 strands of spaghetti, which is a 12 weight cotton. 2 of the strands are SP17, the dark chocolate color, and 1 strand of SP21 caramel. I'm using stitch 37. The width is 3.0 and the needle position is moved 1 over so that this middle here is on one side of the stitch. I think I need to show this from the overhead so you can see better. So here you can kind of start to see, if you look closely, if you stitched it by hand, this is the darker color running, that would be the running stitch, and these lighter colors wind around it and create the outer edge. So my thought is that stitch 37 makes the lighter part, and then this darker part is what I'm couching down with it here. Their running stitch is a variegated gray that I don't have, so I'm going to use 2 strands of one color and a strand of a lighter color instead. I want to start where this color change is. I want the stops and starts to be a little harder to see, and I think this will help. The other thing is that as I go, I'm trying to twist the threads as I'm couching them to get a little bit more of the color variation. I'm trying to line the red line of the foot along the edge of the body, and I think that's going to get the couching thread just to one side of the body. So far, I'm happy with what's coming out from this. Looking behind the machine back here, I think that's looking decent. Going around curves is always fun. I'm constantly twisting to get that variegated look, even though I've got solid colors going in. Next, I'm going past the beak. I want the Pekingese to just go over the beak or into the gap between the bird and the beak, so I'm working very carefully here. Having a longer bit of thread is making the twisting a little easier. You don't want to get it too twisted, but not untwisted either. Sharp turns should probably be done on the inside part of the stitch with the needle down. Like there. Here's where I realized I should have waited to stitch down the branch on the bird until after I did the decorative outline stitching. I only have about 3 stitches worth of space, and I need to stop there or it's going to go back into the log. undone. So this is where I am right now in the bird. I've got everything stitched down with the basic applique stitch with matching wool threads. And I managed to get the beak down and also outline the bird with something to resemble the Pekingese stitch. So the next thing that I'm going to do will be the tail feathers. And then I'll also do this since it's the same stitch. For the tail, actually not these, I was going to use this one for the tail feathers to do a stitch, just a couple of rows here. And then this one to do the belly, and then also this part of it. As far as stitches are concerned, sorry for the bright pink. It was one of the extra scraps that I had for Stitch Library. I'm going to probably use, this is stitch 1368 on the Bernina. I'm probably going to use this, making sure that the V's open the right direction for the belly part here. And then for the back and the tail feathers, I wanted something that better resembles the open fly stitch. I think that's what that one's called. It might be the closed fly. I get them mixed up. So the closest that Bernina has by default is 1332, but these are alternating on the stitch that Bernina has on it. So I did a stitch editor where I basically moved this one down so that they're opposite of each other. And that's stitched out here. So this is what I will use for the bird's back, this one right here. And then this is what I'm planning to use for the tail portion of the bird. This is a list of what the stitches are here, what values I used for the stitches here. This is actually the default. This is the default. I might increase the width to 9.0. I think this one looks a little bit better, which is the 9.0 with the default length. And then this one is 6.0 with a length of 3.5. So those are the settings that I'm going to use for those two stitches for the bird's back and tail feathers. And then for this one, these are the default settings that I'm going to use for the bird's belly. So when I was at the sewing machine, one of the things I forgot to mention is that sometimes you end up with a space in here where this wasn't, specifically right here, it wasn't quite long enough for it to take a full stitch here. So what I did when I was going through the sewing machine this way, instead of letting it take the normal stitch, I kind of pulled back a touch, not exactly pulled back, but gave it a little bit extra resistance so that the feed dogs didn't pull it all the way through. And this ended up being a slightly shorter stitch to make sure that it would fit in underneath of the log and not go into, I was concerned that it would end up going into the log here instead of being just on the bird's tail, because you definitely want this to be behind the log and not on top of. So I just wanted to explain that real quick. So I think the next thing I'm going to do is the same stitch, but larger here with FT 41 is going to be here, and then 1363 will be here. I am going to switch over to stitch 1342. I like how that one looks better for this. For 1342, the stitch width is defaulting to 9.0 and the length is 2.8. I managed to get a slight curve in that stitch, so I'm going to try and mimic that on the bottom half. This is the modified 1332 that I used, where these two sides, either side of this, are opposite of each other. And these are the tail feathers here. And then for this one, I was originally going to use 1363, but that one I didn't like the way that one looked. It's a little shorter than I would like, and it just didn't look as good. So I switched over to 1342, and that's what I have here. And so far I'm happy with the way it's coming out. So the next thing that I'm going to do is outline the log here with, SP19 is going to be used to outline the log. And then I'm going to go with this one. This is Soft Lock 21, and that's going to be used to do decoration down here. And I think what I was planning to do here is like 3 fairly small chain stitch, which I think is stitch 38 on the Bernina. And I'll just do like one here, one here, one here, kind of staggered a little bit like that with the soft lock, because that blends into the wool fairly well. So the next part that I'm going to work on is this stitch right here, which is called the Bullion stitch, which is this one here on their diagram. It's actually a wrapped stitch that would be hard to do quite exactly by machine that way. So the stitch that I found on the Bernina is this one down here, which is stitch 416 on the Bernina, that has kind of a scalloped shape made out of zigzag stitches. So if you shrink the percentage and the width, you can get the various control how high the scallops are and whatnot. So I liked this one the best for this particular application, which is 60% and the width is 3.5. So I'm going to do this underneath of the bird's chin here. For this one, you have to be really careful which direction you stitch so that you can have your scallops going in the correct direction. this point, I will not fit another one in there, so I'm going to stop here and be done. The part that I just finished is this part right here. It doesn't have quite the same amount of dimension as what's on the hand version, but I do still like how it gives that scalloped effect with some of the white behind it showing through. The next part that I'm going to work on is the bird's feet to give him somewhere to stand. So they need to come out from about here. They have them fairly far apart in there. I was going to do mine here, kind of in that realm. The thread that I'm going to use is Spaghetti 103, which is fairly close to what they use. It might be a little bit lighter, but it's fairly close. And stitch number 6, which is just the triple stitch, straight stitch. So I want to mark these out with chalk to try to make sure I get reasonably accurate. And then it comes out into 3 lines there. It's kind of hard to see, but it'll give me a sense. I'm just right now looking for a sense of what I'm trying to do with the chalk. Okay, so let me go ahead and put this on the machine and get his feet stitched. So this is his feet here, which I'm pretty happy with how this came out. He is now standing on the branch. So the next thing I'm going to do is these 2 decorative flowers here. For this one, I'm going to use the same stitch that I created for the hummingbird, which is basically 6 lazy daisy looking stitches. And then for the smaller flower, I'm going to actually use stitch 230 from the Bernina. And those are going to go about here, and I do kind of want to mark out approximate locations for these guys so that I don't get too far off. I'm going to do this one first since it's the biggest, and then this one will be up here however he fits in nicely. So let me go ahead and get those stitched out. So the most recent thing I did were these 2 decorations, which on here they just have 2 lazy daisy flowers. So I have this one and this one that I did here. The next thing to do is this decoration on the top of his head, which is going to be right here. And I'm going to use stitch 38 for that. And the blue thread that I'm planning to use is FT21. And that's going to go right there. Okay, so I got this done here. It's a fairly bright blue, but it does top off his head fairly nicely. They have a more of a teal blue on theirs. The color that I had here is the same color that I used on the hummingbird's wing on the previous block. So the next thing is to stitch down these stems and the 2 flowers here. So I'm going to use this one and this one to do that. This will be the 8 weight. Actually, what I'm planning to do is couch down this thread in sort of a bit of a loopy pattern here, up to there, and something similar on the other side, and use this thread to couch it down, with a basic zigzag, I think a 2.0 width and a standard default length. And then I will also use this thread to triple stitch around this leaf down the center and then for the veins. And then for this leaf right here, I was planning to use, Bernina has stitch 449, I think it is, which I will use here for this leaf. Again, using this thread. Something to watch for is fabric clumping up on you. that's one triple stitch, and then switch over to 449. Think at this point I'm done with it. I did some stitching for the stems, outline of the leaf and the veins in the leaf, and I also did a satin stitch leaf here. So let's take a look at what that looks like and some notes that I have on that. So here's the stitching that I did for the stems. The one note here is that I had a little trouble with that. The biggest key there is make sure that you keep the thread that you're couching down taut the entire time you're couching it down. It got a little bit loose there and kind of clumped up a little more. This side came out a little bit better, and then this is stitch 449 on the Bernina. Basically, it's a satin stitch leaf that I thought looked pretty good there. The other note that I had is doing this leaf. I had planned to use this, which I think is Fruity FT 41, something like that. Yeah, I can't find the number. This is FT 31, which is what I used to couch this down. However, on the leaf, I ended up with some lines. It clumped in colors and almost looked like a candy cane leaf. So I decided to actually go with a solid spaghetti thread for that stitch there. This is SP12, which is what I did for this leaf here. And then I used the same SP12 for the veins on this leaf and the outlining of this leaf. So at this point, I think I'm done. Just as a comparison, here's this one. that they have, which there are some stitches that look quite a bit different for various reasons, but I think overall it came out fairly well with similar stitches in each of the various places. And at this point, I think I'm done with block 3. So, this is what I came up with for block 3. I'm pretty happy with how it came out. Hopefully it gives you some ideas on how to work with your blocks. If you have any questions, please post them down below, and bye for now.